So I guess firstly, when you think of North and South, what comes to mind?
It was an unbelievably great, probably 4 years of my life. It was like a new family, a complete family that we lived and ate and drank and worked together across this long period of time, of which there were births and marriages and new loves and lost loves. So it was living in this, it would be the equivalent of the 4 or 5 years that you do your A&O levels, right, with the same group of people. But we were all adults and we were all working. We didn't act like adults, but we were all adults, living this incredible experience of translating this novel into this big mini series.
I think I'm right in saying that North and South was one of, if not the most expensive miniseries ever made at that point in '85. So I guess did it seem like a big deal at the time?
Oh yeah, without question. I mean, when I was standing there, on these days where we were having the Civil War reenactment days and putting together these giant battle sequences with over 1,000 reenactors from all over the United States that have all had come there to camp out and live there while we, did this film. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. It was just this unbelievable experience. Like, we weren't the first to use these group of, reenactors because Glory had done it before. But we had heard about how Glory had used these people called reenactors, and basically, we didn't even pay them salaries. All we had to do was give them land, give them food, give them bathrooms, and give them water, and they were willing to come and, now needless to say, it wasn't cheap feeding them all because it was literally, in the morning at 5, because they camped out as we were filming. Like they built there was the north and the south. They had separate areas because they wouldn't room together, and they built whole camps. Like one had 600 and I think the other had 400, people in their camps. And they had in the morning they would, play the trumpet, and they'd all line up and come to our catering trucks in full formation, and march in their uniforms and march through our trucks and past our crew to get their food in the morning. I mean, it was just this incredible experience that, was less about the money spent than the size and the magnitude of what we were trying to do.
But your father, David Wolper, was really sort of instrumental in getting uh, North and South to the screen from the page just a couple of years after John Jakes' first North and South book. So I guess can you remember sort of how it all came about and just how influential your father was in that, I suppose?
Well, he had found his very successful niche, although he was like any good artist, right? You have to keep changing yourself, reinventing yourself if you want to stay active. But during this period of time, he was in this critically popular area of translating historical drama. So my father for a long time was a documentarian. He loved documentaries. He made documentaries. He made thousands of documentaries. And at a certain point, the American television networks didn't want documentaries anymore, but he still loved history. So what he did is he created this new genre called a uh, a docudrama, where he would just take a real event, right, and hire actors to play out the roles. So he got into this thing of like buying these great historical novels that were written by people like John Jakes and Alex Haley and Nat Turner and so many of these historical novels. And this was perfect for him. He loves American history, particularly, although all world history. And when he heard about these books that were about the American Civil War and the story of, brotherhood and love in the middle of it. He immediately was attracted to it, and his great skill set was less the making of a show, quite frankly, than it was selling a show. He was a great salesman, right? So he wasn't the guy who built the Lamborghini or the Ferrari engine. He was the guy who could convince people to pay the great engineers to make it. So he was this great leader who was able to sell an idea and then give the money to, these all these great groups of filmmakers, which is exactly what he did here.
I think I'm right in saying that sort of during the production of each book, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but your role sort of developed from production executive to associate producer and then executive producer.
Yeah.
I guess how did your role evolve, and did you find that you sort of got more hands-on as time went on?
Well, it was a little bit of um, I was growing into my father's company at the same time. This show was sort of like my it wasn't my elementary school, but it was certainly my high school. This was my high school education was this show. So even though I had executive produced other things, the massive size of this one, it became the learning ground, and I progressed very quickly through it all. And my father was never going to let me do something that I wasn't ready for. So I had to do it in steps. Um, but my role never really changed in terms of what I really was doing the whole time because, like whether you're a production executive, associate producer, anytime the word producer is in your name, you only have one goal, and that is whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And so, as a producer, no matter what pronoun is before the word producer, you're still doing whatever it takes. So if it was cleaning out the latrines in the reenactors' places or having a meeting with the governor of, South Carolina to get him to agree to give us national park, land to use for our reenactments, I had to do it.
And I think we sort of touched on the scope of the series at the start, but I guess what was the sort of the atmosphere like on set? Because you sort of had the up and coming stars, the established names, and then you sort of had the guest stars as well, many of which were sort of Hollywood icons. You had the thousands of extras and costumes, locations, and it seems like there's a lot of moving parts to put together there.
Yeah, it was very, very, without question, it was extremely complex operation that we were putting, together. Um, and somehow, you know, it, it was less that people were like, "Oh, we really got to." There was something about there was the core crew, cast and crew that sort of stayed through the whole show, and then there were these people that kept coming in, right? And the core group that was there the whole time was really enjoying the process so much. There was such a enjoyable like I know people always fucking say when they're making a movie, "Oh, it's the best experience of my life working with, Tom Cruise. It was just such a fantastic." No, this really fucking was a great experience. Everybody was having a blast and everybody was working hard simultaneously, So when the new group came in, they could tell right away that there was a nice energy. You know how you can walk into a room sometimes and you can immediately tell if there's a good energy or not. There was always a good energy in this room. And the new people coming in would be in awe of how much fun we were having. And we who were there all the time were in awe of these new unbelievable actors, legendary actors that, would come in for a day or two or 3 days here and there. And it just all melded very quickly all the time.
And we sort of touched on the actors there, but do you have any sort of favorite encounters of meeting or working with the actors? Because I suppose you had people like Patrick Swayze and James Reed who were kind of like the faces of this thing, but then you had like James Stewart in his last ever on-screen role, and Elizabeth Taylor and Gene Simmons, which, yeah, today it seems kind of hard to imagine.
Yeah. Well, I think it really started. I mean, Patrick Swayze um, has this amazing uh, energy and soul and spirit when we were making the show, where he's just this completely likable, fun-loving, hard partying, hard living kind of guy. And so he was sort of the leader of, he was the fun leader. He was the camp counselor, so to speak. This was a guy who, I'm speaking a little out of school now, but it's fine. I mean, this is a guy that would party hard all night, right? And we'd have to help him get to the set in the morning because he'd come right from partying right to the set. But the minute the director would say, roll camera, somehow he knew all his lines and he was on it. And then the camera would go off and he'd, you know, fall back and but he never he oddly was able to balance, the fun and the work the whole time. And all of us were basically trying to keep up with him, right? Live up to his standards of both the fun and the hard work.
Right.
And by the way, don't let some of the older legendary people think that they were coming and being stodgy, participants in the making of the film. They got into the groove as well.
And I guess what was it like to sort of relive that time period and see the events of the Civil War and what led up to it come to life and all of those complexities, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. We had some technical advisors, and names and remember their names. Uh, they changed a lot of times because there were different technical advisors for different events. But, for example, when we did the Civil War enactments, right, we would set up for these big shots and we'd have like 30 cameras all over the field. And the whole thing was choreographed, who was going to go where and what everybody was going to do and blah, blah, blah. And then, the director would get up there on his crane and on this loud speaker system, went over this, hectares of fields that we were on. He would go and action. And, all of a sudden the battles would start and the cannons would start firing. And, the first time we did it, the entire field was covered in smoke from all the cannons and gunfire, and nobody could see anything. And it was so interesting. The historians go, my God, nobody ever wrote about that. Like they experienced something in the contemporary that informed new study of the past, where they discovered, oh, yeah, we see in some diaries that they couldn't see back then either, but nobody's ever reported on that. So events that happened on our recreations of the making of the film informed historians on things that might have happened in the past that they might have missed, which was really interesting. Um, so it was we were really actually experiencing it for real, right? I mean, every day there were hundreds of people walking around in this wardrobe. It's like we were living it. I know myself and some of the assistant directors, we actually uh, worked during the day from horses. We worked on a horse because there were such distances we had to go to communicate and exchange ideas and figure things out that we were often, on horses ourselves. And so we would put on wardrobe. I actually have a great picture of myself. I should actually send you the picture of me on a horse in wardrobe because we were often in the shots. Like it took us too long to get all the way back to get out of the shot. So finally, they say, Mark and to the assistant director, Josh McGough, hey, Josh, Mark, why don't you guys just put on wardrobe and we don't have to wait for you to come out of the scene. You can just stay there.
Hmm. Wow, remarkable. Um, I guess you sort of still in touch with anyone from North and South. Did you work with anyone on different projects, or was it one of those things in one of those industries where everyone's sort of together for that period of time and then everyone goes off and does their separate thing? And I know there are obviously three books, but
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I did work with the directors. I worked with Kevin Connor, who did number two again, and I did work with the director on three, whose name escapes me now. You're probably more up to speed on things now than I was. But I worked with those directors again. I worked with Gene Simmons before Thornbirds, which was funny. I worked with her on Thornbirds before North and South.
Mm,
Um, the cinematographer on all of them, he did a couple of shows for me in the future. So there was still some connection.
mm,
But I mean, think about it. I was working on that show for almost 5 years from the pre-production of the first one through the finish of the last one. It might have been more, it might have been 6 years. So I was like I was living with these people. It's not like they went off and came back. We were just stuck with each other.
mm.
Some people, there are some actors that didn't, I know some of our actors went into different professions after this. It was just so exhausting for them. They just like, all right, like I've had my fill.
And you touched on it a minute ago, actually, but I suppose was there either a pressure or an expectation to make North and South um, a hit, given the fact that obviously, as you say, you previously worked on the Thornbirds with your father, and Roots had come out as well a couple of years before that, and these were the sort of big, hits. So was there sort of a pressure, perhaps pressure is the wrong word, but an expectation that North and South would be, the next big thing, really?
I think every time filmmakers and actors enter into the process of making a film, they're always doing it under the belief that it's going to be an Academy Award winner. And you always rise up to that level. Like, I don't think people sit around and go, hey, let's make a cultish B film, B level film, right? They're actually sitting down. When you do Sharknado, I actually think they were thinking, I'm actually going to make a really great movie. It just ends up becoming a B movie. So everybody always enters every filmmaking process believing that they're they're going to make the best, that they have a high bar to rise up to, and we always do it. Yes, this was the heyday of the miniseries, and we were doing the most expensive one, so we all knew that. It was about U.S. history, and so we were making it for American Network, so we knew that. I was doing it on the coattails of my father, so I had that additional pressure. So we all knew it, and maybe that's why we had so much fun because we knew how important what we were doing could be. And therefore, there's a lot of steam that you have to let off. And so, you end up having fun as a result of it.
And North and South sort of books one and two kind of shot and released back to back, and book three came the best part of a decade later. I guess was there always sort of an intention to have a third part to the story on the small screen, or was it a surprise that sort of a few years later that it did come about? Can you sort of remember how that happened?
I think what happened is John Jakes and I were talking about another project, and he goes, "Why didn't you guys ever finish the last part of it?" And I hadn't even remembered that we didn't. And I go, "Oh shit, that's a great idea. You know what? It was successful enough, and it's been long enough since the last one. We should consider doing this again." And so it was a very easy sale. Um, Actually, I take that back. It was not an easy sale. We took it was it on a different network now, or am I getting this messed up with one of our other shows? But anyways, um, we just the first ones were so, there's always this fear when you do something super successful, you don't want to get into this thing of eating your children, right? Like, let's burn it out. Let's go again, like pushing it too far. So I think after the difficulties and the amount of time and the energy and how tired we all were after the first two, that we're like, okay, let's just let this sit. And then time goes by and you're working on other shows and you forget that there was even a possibility of doing a third one until I was talking to John Jakes, and we're like, oh shit, let's finish this trilogy off.
And again, you kind of touched on it at the start, but I suppose what did working on North and South kind of do for your career? Obviously, it didn't put you off at all.
Well, I'm honored to say that I've worked on three of the most successful miniseries of all time, thanks to, you know, a patriarchy, right? Or, of my father, but working on Thornbirds, working on North and South, and working on Queen, which was kind of a reimagining and then doing Roots a second time about 7 or 8 years ago. So, I fell into the very lucky situation of being able to do great historical drama like my father.
I guess sort of practically 40 years on now, sort of what do you think is the enduring impact and legacy of North and South? And could you have imagined 40 years ago that people would still be watching it and would still be talking about it all this time later?
I think it's even more valuable now in today's history because the line of divide still exists. It still exists in America more now than it ever has. And Matt, you may have just inspired the idea of maybe it's time to make North and South yet again, because it certainly um, resonates with what's going on, not only in America, but in, Russia and Ukraine, in Israel and Gaza. I mean, it's always an ongoing story of countries and people divided by an imaginary line.
No, no, absolutely. Um, I think they were the sort of the main points I wanted to ask you really. And without wanting to put you on the spot, is there anything either you feel I've missed or anything you'd like to add? There might not be, but certainly if there is anything that jumps out to you, you're more than welcome to say so.
Well, you're certainly familiar with the multiple weddings that happen on the show and love stories that happened. And I
Yes.
think that was, really just a function of how long and we were all,
Mm,
you know, caged together, so to speak.
mm,
Um, I think I have a better understanding of American history because I worked on the show. Like it was like a master's course in, American history or Civil War history. And it served me well in shows that I did later and doing Roots again, in doing Queen, in doing Murder in Mississippi, a civil rights film that I did. So and the lessons I learned and the growth that I gained and the fun that I had. Some of the best, not some of, the best memories I have in the film industry are those first two North and Souths.
mm. It's amazing to hear and interesting to hear it. I spoke a couple of weeks ago to Bob Papazian, who also sort of
Yeah.
produced book two.
He
Uh,
was really the guy I who mentored under, by the way, under Bob. Bob was really my father was there, obviously, back in LA, but Bob was right there. So he really was my mentor on this show. And
right.
I learned a lot from Bob Papazian.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because he was kind of saying that similar to you, it was this huge experience for him, and he kind of found afterwards that he was always trying to chase that same experience that he'd have with North and South, and the other things he did afterwards were also great, but he always came back to North and South. Really, nothing kind of surpassed that.
No, I can agree with that was an incredible period of time, an
Mm,
incredible story, an incredible miniseries. And, you can talk about putting all the sort of best elements together for a project in the entertainment industry. I said, there's this amazing thing about the entertainment industry where you can take the top director, the top actor, the top producer, the top screenwriter, the top composer, and you can put them together. And you may not have a great show. And sometimes you can put a bunch of unknowns together and end up with an incredible show. And, North and South was kind of this odd blend of both.